She entered the wrong hotel room on her honeymoon. The Mafia Boss blocked the exit and said, "He's gone. I'm staying." Sloane Ashford walked into room 702 at 9:14 p.m. on her wedding night, wearing a floor-length silk robe and carrying a vintage brass key that felt like the heaviest object she had ever held. In exactly 4 minutes, a man she had never met would hand her a glass of scotch and tell her she was collateral. In exactly 1 hour, her new husband would be crossing the Italian border in a stolen car, leaving her behind as payment for a gambling debt she didn't know existed. But she didn't know any of that yet. Right now, she was standing in the dim, velvet-lined hallway of the Palazzo Moretti, listening to the muffled sounds of the Venetian canals outside. "Happy ever after," she whispered to herself, smoothing the lace at her collar. Finally, it wasn't the champagne or the gondola ride or even the massive diamond on her finger that made her feel this way. It was the promise of safety. For an archivist who spent her life tucked away in the silent, predictable rows of a library, Julian had been her first risk. He was the one who promised to pull her out of the dust and give her a life that mattered. She had spent 26 years being the girl people looked past, the quiet one in the corner of the room, the one who was meant to be a spectator. Tonight, she was the lead character. The palazzo was beautiful in the way that old, dangerous things often are. It was shadows and gold leaf, a labyrinth of secrets that Julian had insisted was the only place worthy of their first night. She reached the door of the royal suite, her heart hammering against her ribs. Julian had told her to meet him there. He said he had a surprise. She turned the key, the heavy wood creaking as it swung open. The room was bathed in amber light, smelling of expensive tobacco and a woodsy, sharp cologne that didn't belong to Julian. Sloane stepped inside, her eyes searching the shadows for her husband. "Julian," she called out, her voice fluttering. "I'm here. I thought you said the room was at the end of the hall, but this key worked on." She stopped. The air in the room felt heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on her arms stand up. A man was sitting in a high-backed leather chair near the window, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. He wasn't Julian. He was broader, taller, his presence filling the suite like a physical weight. He didn't move as she entered. He simply watched her, his eyes like polished obsidian. Sloane's hand went to her throat, her fingers tangling in her necklace. I'm so sorry," she stammered, backing toward the door. "I have the wrong room. My husband, Julian Vance, he must have been mistaken. The concierge gave me this key, and it opened the door, so I thought." The man stood up. He moved with a predatory grace that made the breath catch in Sloane's lungs. He was dressed in a black suit that cost more than her entire wedding, his shirt open at the collar to reveal a glimpse of a dark tattoo snaking up his neck. He didn't look like a tourist. He looked like the owner of the world. "You're not in the wrong room, Sloane," he said. His voice was a low, melodic growl that vibrated in her chest. She froze. "How do you know my name?" He walked toward her, and instinctively, Sloane turned to grab the door handle. Before her fingers could close around the brass, his hand shot out, slamming the door shut with a finality that echoed through the suite. He leaned his weight against the wood, blocking her only exit. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a stark contrast to the cold fear settling in her marrow. "Who are you?" she gasped, pressing her back against the door, her wide eyes fixed on his face. He had a strong jawline shadowed by light stubble and a cold, commanding expression that suggested he was calculating her value in real time. "My name is Dante Moretti," he said, his voice flat and devoid of empathy. "And you are the only thing Julian had left to trade." "Trade?" Sloane shook her head, a nervous laugh escaping her. "That's ridiculous. Julian is downstairs. He's getting us drinks. He's..." Julian is at the docks, Dante interrupted, his eyes pinning her in place. He's currently trading his wedding ring for a head start to the border. He owed me a debt that your little library salary couldn't cover in 3 lifetimes. He offered me the palazzo's keys, his loyalty, and finally, he offered the girl in the white lace. The world seemed to tilt. No, he wouldn't. Dante reached into his pocket and pulled out a phone, sliding a video across the screen. Sloane watched in horror as her husband, the man she had promised her life to 4 hours ago, handed a set of files to a group of armed men in the lobby before sprinting toward a waiting car. He didn't look back. Not once. "He's gone," Dante said, his voice dropping to a whisper as he leaned down, his face inches from hers. "And since I don't like being shortchanged, I'm staying. You belong to the Moretti estate now, Sloane. You'd better start getting used to the shadows. If you are a lover of stories that stays with you even after watching, like and subscribe to the channel so YouTube doesn't hide the next story from you. Also tell me in the comments section the country you are watching from." Sloane tried to push past him, her hands trembling, but he didn't move an inch. He was a mountain of black silk and cold intent. "Let me go? I'll call the police." The police don't come to this floor," Dante said, his eyes darkening as he watched a single tear trail down her cheek. "You walk out that door, and the men who were chasing Julian will find you. They aren't as patient as I am. Here, you are a guest of the Iron King. Out there, you are a target." He reached out, his thumb catching the tear on her cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle for a man who had just dismantled her entire life. Sloane shivered, a terrifying mix of fear and an unwanted spark of electricity shooting through her. "Welcome home, Sloane," he whispered. "Your honeymoon has officially ended." The heavy brass key felt like a lead weight in Sloane's hand as she stood in the center of the royal suite, the silence of the room pressing against her ears. Just moments ago, she had been a bride, floating on the promise of a new life. Now, the opulent gold leafing on the walls looked like the bars of a gilded cage. Dante Moretti hadn't moved from the door. He stood there, a shadow against the dark wood, his presence radiating a cold, absolute authority that made the air feel thin. "You're lying," Sloane whispered, her voice cracking. She looked down at her hands, where the silk of her robe was bunched between her trembling fingers. "Julian is a researcher. He's a good man. He couldn't just give me away." Dante tilted his head, a slow, predatory movement. "A researcher?" A dry, humorless sound escaped his throat. "Julian Vance is a thief who lacks the talent to be a professional. He didn't just gamble away money he didn't have, Sloane. He spent the last 6 months systematically stripping the Moretti archives of documents that don't belong to him. Documents that are worth more than the life of every person in this building." He stepped away from the door, moving toward her with a measured stride. Every instinct in Sloane's body screamed for her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The balcony was a 3-story drop into the dark waters of the canal, and the only exit was occupied by the man her husband had crossed. "He knew I was coming for him," Dante continued, his voice dropping to a low, conversational tone that was somehow more terrifying than a shout. "He knew that in Venice, I am the law, so he brought me a peace offering. He knew I had a penchant for rare things, for things that are well-preserved and untainted. He offered me his new wife in exchange for a 24-hour head start." "I am not an object," Sloane snapped, a spark of indignation momentarily overriding her terror. "You can't just keep me. This is the 21st century. I have a phone. I have family. You have a dead phone on the nightstand," Dante countered, gesturing toward the marble table where her device sat, likely already remotely wiped by Julian. "And as for your family, Julian told them you were going on a tech-free honeymoon to a private island. No one will look for you for weeks. By the time they do, Sloane Ashford will be a ghost. Sloane felt the floor beneath her sway. She reached out, her hand landing on the edge of the mahogany bedpost to steady herself. The white silk sheets were perfectly turned down, a cruel mockery of the night she was supposed to have. "Why?" she breathed, looking up at him. "If he's the one who robbed you, why keep me? I don't know where the documents are. I don't know anything about his debts." Dante stopped just inches from her. He was so tall she had to crane her neck to look him in the eye. Up close, the intensity of his gaze was suffocating. He smelled of rain and dark cedar, a scent that felt like an intrusion on her senses. "Because Julian thinks you're a distraction," Dante said, reaching out to tuck a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear. His touch was lightning cold. "He thinks I'll be too busy breaking you in to follow his trail. He's wrong. I'm quite good at multitasking." He leaned in closer, his shadow swallowing her whole. "And because, Sloane, you're an archivist. You understand the value of things that are lost and found. Julian didn't realize that by leaving you here, he gave me the only person capable of cataloging exactly what he stole from me." He stepped back, the oppressive weight of his proximity lifting just enough for her to draw a jagged breath. He walked toward the side table and poured a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. The clink of the glass was the only sound in the room. "Tonight, you will stay in this room," Dante commanded, not looking back as he headed toward the door. "The locks are electronic. Don't bother trying the windows. The glass is reinforced. Tomorrow morning, your life as Mrs. Vance ends, and your debt to the Moretti family begins." He reached the door and paused, his hand on the handle. He looked back at her over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "Sleep well, Sloane. It's the last night you'll spend as an innocent woman." The door clicked shut, the sound of the electronic lock engaging echoing like a gunshot in the silent suite. Sloane was alone, surrounded by gold and silk, realizing with a sickening jolt that her honeymoon hadn't just ended. It had turned into a war. Sloane didn't sleep. She spent the night pacing the length of the royal suite, her silk heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor until she finally kicked them off in frustration. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Julian's face, not the man she had married, but the man on the security footage, the one who had traded her like a piece of vintage luggage. The sun rose over the Adriatic, casting a pale, sickly gold light across the room that did nothing to warm the chill in her bones. At exactly 8 o'clock, the electronic lock hissed, and the heavy doors swung open. Two men in sharp, charcoal suits stood there, their expressions as immobile as the stone gargoyles on the palazzo's facade. They didn't speak. They simply gestured for her to follow. Sloane gathered the remains of her dignity, pulling her neutral trench coat over her wedding silk, and walked. They led her down a series of corridors that smelled of beeswax and ancient dust until they reached a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the Grand Canal. Dante Moretti was already there. He sat at a small bistro table, a porcelain espresso cup in one hand and a thick, leather-bound ledger in the other. He looked refreshed, as if he hadn't spent the night dismantling a woman's soul. He didn't look up as she was escorted to the chair opposite him. "Sit, Sloane," he said, his voice as smooth as the water below. She sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their shaking. "Where is he? Have you found him?" Dante finally looked up. His eyes were even more piercing in the daylight, a cold, crystalline blue that seemed to strip away her defenses. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a grainy printout of a border crossing. "Julian crossed into Slovenia at 4:12 a.m., Dante said flatly. "By now, he's likely ditched the car and is heading toward a safe house he thinks I don't know about. He's fast, I'll give him that. Fear is an excellent motivator." The last flicker of hope in Sloane's chest died. He was really gone. Then let me go? If he's out of the country, I'm of no use to you as a distraction. You still don't understand the mathematics of this situation, Dante said, setting his cup down with a precise click. He opened the ledger to a page filled with Julian's frantic, looping handwriting. Your husband didn't just steal from me. He took a series of 16th-century deeds and a manifest of silent assets, properties and accounts that don't officially exist. To the Moretti family, those papers are worth roughly 40 million euros. To the people Julian is trying to sell them to, they are worth even more. Sloane's breath hitched. 40 million. And then there is the matter of the personal insult. Dante continued, his jaw tightening. He stayed in my home, ate my food, and used my protection while he systematically gutted my history. In my world, that kind of debt is rarely settled with currency. He leaned forward, his shadow stretching across the table until it touched her. Julian left you here as the collateral for that 40 million. He signed a document, which I have in my safe, stating that should he fail to return the assets within 48 hours, his interest in his marriage, his assets, and his wife would be forfeited to the Moretti estate to be used as I see fit. Sloane felt a wave of nausea. He signed me away? Like a car. Worse, Dante whispered. A car has a fixed value. Your value is currently fluctuating based on how much you can help me recover what he took. He signaled to one of the guards, who stepped forward with a heavy, dust-covered box. Julian was an amateur. He left behind his notes, his travel logs, and the fragments of the documents he couldn't carry. You are the best archivist in London, Sloane. You're going to spend your honeymoon rebuilding my history and finding the holes Julian left behind. Dante stood, looming over her. He reached down, his fingers brushing the gold band still on her finger. Then I treat you like any other bad debt. I sell you to the highest bidder to recoup my losses. And believe me, the men Julian owes money to have far less appreciation for rare things than I do. He straightened his coat, his eyes turning back into ice. The bill is due, Sloane. And since your husband isn't here to pay it, I'm looking at the only currency I have left. The transition from the sun-drenched terrace to the interior of the Moretti villa felt like stepping into a beautiful, suffocating dream. For 3 days, Sloane was treated with a terrifying level of courtesy. Servants appeared at silent intervals with trays of fresh pasta, bitter espresso, and silk garments that fit her measurements with unsettling precision. Every room was a masterpiece of Renaissance art and modern security, a place where the scent of old parchment mingled with the ozone of high-tech motion sensors. She was allowed to wander the main gardens, a sprawling labyrinth of manicured hedges and marble statues that overlooked the shimmering Venetian lagoon. But the freedom was an illusion. Every time she reached a certain radius from the villa's core, a shadow would move among the cypress trees. One of Dante's men, always watching, always silent. By the 4th afternoon, the silence of the archives began to feel like the dirt of a grave. Sloane stood by the tall, wrought-iron perimeter fence at the edge of the estate, her fingers curling around the cold metal. Beyond the bars, a narrow cobblestone path led toward the public ferry docks. She could see people, real people, who weren't debt collectors or assassins. She looked back at the villa. Dante was in a meeting with his capos, his voice a low, rhythmic vibration coming from the library windows. This was it. She found a section of the stone wall where the ancient mortar had crumbled, creating a makeshift ladder. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled up, the rough stone scraping her palms, her neutral coat snagging on a rogue vine. When she reached the top, the drop to the other side looked dizzying, but the prospect of the lagoon's salt air was intoxicating. She jumped. The impact jarred her teeth, and she hit the grass on the other side with a muffled thud. She didn't wait to check for bruises. She scrambled to her feet and sprinted toward the path, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She reached the cobblestones, her mind already racing toward the British consulate, toward a life where collateral was just a word in a textbook. A black SUV drifted into her path, silent as a ghost. The passenger window rolled down. Dante sat in the back, his face half obscured by the shadows of the tinted glass. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "The ferry doesn't run for another 20 minutes, Sloane," he said, his voice cutting through her panic like a razor. "And the man at the ticket booth is on my payroll. You would have been back in the villa before the boat even docked." Sloane stood her ground, her chest heaving, her hair wild and tangled from the climb. "You can't keep me here forever. I'm not a prisoner." "You're right," Dante said, pushing the door open. He didn't get out. He simply gestured to the empty seat beside him. "A prisoner is someone who has no choice. You have a choice. You can get in this car and finish the work you started in the archives, or you can keep running until the people Julian robbed find you. My men have already intercepted 2 of them at the airport. They don't want the documents back, Sloane. They want blood for the embarrassment." He watched her, his blue eyes as cold and unforgiving as the deep water of the canal. "I am the only thing standing between you and a very shallow grave in the marshes. That makes this a sanctuary, not a prison." The adrenaline that had fueled her flight evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow weight. She looked back at the path, then at the man in the car. The Iron King wasn't just her captor. He was her only shield. With a shuddering breath, Sloane walked to the SUV and slid into the leather interior. The door clicked shut, the electronic lock engaging with that familiar, final hiss. Dante didn't say a word as the car turned back toward the villa. He simply reached over and brushed a stray leaf from her shoulder, his fingers lingering for a second too long against her skin. It was a catch and release, a reminder that the velvet walls were there for her protection as much as her confinement. And as the gates of the villa swung open to swallow them once more, Sloane realized the most terrifying part. She was starting to feel safer inside the cage than out of it. The work was the only thing that kept the walls from closing in. For the next 2 days, Sloane retreated into the subterranean heart of the villa, the Moretti Private Archives. It was a cavernous space of vaulted stone ceilings and climate-controlled glass, smelling of beeswax, vanilla-scented rot, and centuries of secrets. To anyone else, the room was a chaotic graveyard of paper. To Sloane, it was a puzzle waiting for a master. She traded her wedding silk for a pair of dark trousers and a crisp white shirt she'd found in a guest suite, pinning her hair back with a stray pencil. She stopped seeing the documents as tools of a criminal empire and started seeing them as a broken narrative. She worked with a silent, feverish intensity, moving between the heavy mahogany tables and the towering oak shelves. She began to group the fragments Julian had left behind by ink type, paper grain, and the specific seals of the families involved. She was deep into a series of 19th-century land grants when the heavy iron door creaked. She didn't look up. The rhythm of the footsteps told her exactly who it was. Heavy, deliberate, and possessing the floor with every strike. Dante stopped at the edge of her workspace. He had been away for 12 hours, likely dealing with the fallout of Julian's betrayal, and the scent of cold rain and expensive tobacco clung to his wool overcoat. He looked at the room, and for the first time since she'd met him, his mask of stony indifference cracked. The central table, which had been a mountain of unsorted folders 48 hours ago, was now a masterpiece of categorization. Sloane had used colored ribbons to spine mark the ledgers and had created a cross-referenced index on a stack of legal pads. "What is this?" Dante asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It's your history," Sloane replied, finally setting down her magnifying glass. Her eyes were tired, shadowed by late nights, but they held a clarity he hadn't seen before. Julian was looking for the ledgers with the highest immediate street value. He was a scavenger, but he was messy. He missed the connection between your shipping manifests in the 1920s and the current holdings in the Adriatic. "I've relinked them." Dante walked to the table, his gloved hand hovering over a meticulously arranged row of documents. He picked up a ledger she had flagged with a yellow slip of paper. "This was lost in the 1980s. My father spent years looking for the paper trail of the Tristina acquisition." "It wasn't lost," Sloane said, standing up and stretching her stiff back. "It was misfiled under ecclesiastical records because the notary was a Jesuit priest." Julian walked right past it because he didn't know how to read the soul of a collection. He just saw paper. "I see the people who wrote it." Dante turned the pages, the parchment dry and rasping in the silent room. He looked at the ledger, then back at Sloane. The way he looked at her shifted. The trophy Julian had traded, the beautiful, trembling bride in room 702, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had just handed him a map to a hidden kingdom. "You've found more in 48 hours than my legal team has found in a decade," he said. He took a step closer, his presence no longer just threatening, but strangely magnetic. The air between them hummed with a new kind of tension, not the fear of a captive, but the mutual recognition of power. "I told you," Sloane said, her voice steady. "I'm an archivist. You think I'm just a debt to be collected, but I'm the only person who can tell you exactly what you've lost and how to get it back." Dante reached out, his fingers brushing the edge of the legal pad where she'd written her notes. His touch was light, almost reverent. "I underestimated you, Sloane. Julian didn't leave me a distraction. He left me a weapon." He looked into her eyes, and for a fleeting second, the coldness in his gaze was replaced by a dark, simmering admiration. "Finish the audit. If you can prove the Adriatic holdings are secure, your debt might just turn into a partnership." As he turned to leave, Sloane realized the cage hadn't just changed its shape, it had changed its purpose. She wasn't just staying because he blocked the exit. She was staying because, for the first time in her life, someone was looking at her and seeing a queen instead of a ghost. The transition from the dusty solitude of the archives to the blinding opulence of the Palazzo Vendramin was a shock to Sloane's senses. Dante had insisted on the gala, claiming that the only way to flush out the buyers of Julian's stolen documents was to appear untouchable. If the world saw the Iron King with his new bride, it signaled that the Moretti Empire was not only intact but flourishing. Sloane stood before a floor-to-ceiling gilded mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. She was draped in midnight blue silk that clung to her curves like a second skin, the neckline plunging just enough to be dangerous. Around her neck sat a collar of sapphires that felt as heavy as the shackles Dante had first promised. Her hair, usually pinned back with a messy pencil, was now a dark, cascading wave that framed a face sharpened by defiance and a lack of sleep. "The mask suits you," a voice rumbled from the doorway. Dante stepped into the room, looking devastating in a custom black tuxedo. He walked toward her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. He didn't touch her, but the proximity made the air between them feel thick and electric. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, ornate mask made of laser-cut black metal. "In Venice, we hide our faces to reveal our true selves," he whispered, leaning down to tie the silk ribbons behind her head. His fingers brushed the sensitive skin of her nape, and despite herself, Sloane felt a shiver that wasn't born of fear. "Tonight, you are not an archivist. You are the woman who owns this city." If you look like you belong at my side, no one will dare ask where Julian is. And if I fail, Sloane asked, her reflection's eyes searching his. You won't, he said, his hand lingering on her shoulder. You've spent years cataloging history, Sloane. Tonight, you simply have to make it. The gala was a sea of shimmering masks, whispered Italian, and the clinking of crystal. As they entered the ballroom, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. Sloane felt 1,000 eyes on her, but Dante's hand was firm on the small of her back, a constant, grounding heat. They moved through the room with a choreographed grace, Dante playing the role of the devoted husband with a chillingly convincing tenderness. When the orchestra began a slow, haunting waltz, Dante led her to the center of the floor. As he pulled her into his arms, the world outside the ballroom vanished. One hand held hers in a crushing, protective grip, while the other rested against her spine, guiding her with effortless strength. You're shaking, he murmured, his breath hot against her ear as they spun. It's a lot of pressure for a trophy, she countered, her voice breathless. Dante pulled her slightly closer, their bodies moving in perfect, intuitive sync. I told you in the archives, you are no longer a trophy. You are the only person in this room who knows exactly how much power is hidden in my ledgers. That makes you the most dangerous woman here. Sloane looked up at him, the dark metal of her mask pressing against her skin. For the first time, she didn't see the monster who had blocked the hotel door. She saw a man who was as trapped by his legacy as she was by her debt. The cold, calculating blue of his eyes had softened into something warmer, something that looked dangerously like admiration. As the music reached a crescendo, the facade of captor and prisoner seemed to melt away. In the middle of the dance floor, surrounded by enemies and shadows, Sloane felt a spark of genuine connection, a terrifying, electric pull toward the man who had stolen her life only to give her a throne. Don't look away, Dante whispered, his gaze locking onto hers. Let them see exactly who you are. In that moment, the glass mask wasn't just a disguise, it was a shield. And as the dance ended, Sloane realized she wasn't just playing the role of the Mafia queen. She was beginning to want the crown. The high of the gala vanished the moment Sloane stepped back into the shadows of the Moretti villa. The sapphire collar felt like a weighted shackle again, and the silence of the marble hallways seemed to pulse with a new, restless energy. Dante had been pulled away by his security chief the second they crossed the threshold, leaving Sloane to navigate the dim corridor toward her suite alone. The moonlight filtered through the arched windows, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. Halfway to her door, a floorboard groaned behind her. Sloane spun around, her heart leaping into her throat, expecting to see one of Dante's guards. Instead, a figure emerged from the darkness of a recessed alcove. Sloane, a frantic, familiar whisper hissed. She froze. Standing in the shadows, looking disheveled and wild-eyed, was Julian. He wasn't wearing the designer suit from their wedding. He was in a dark hoodie, his face smudged with dirt and sweat. Julian, she gasped, her voice a mix of shock and a lingering, habitual relief. How did you get in here? Dante said you were across the border. I never left. Not really, he said, stepping closer, his hands shaking as he reached for her. I had to wait for the right moment. I've come to get you out of here, Sloane. We have to go, right now? There's a boat waiting at the service entrance. Sloane took a step back, her back hitting the cold stone wall. He told me everything, Julian. He told me about the debt. He showed me the video of you running away while I was trapped in that room. Julian's expression flickered, a momentary flash of guilt replaced by a desperate, slick persuasion. It was a play. I had to make him think I'd abandoned you, so he'd drop his guard. I knew he wouldn't hurt you. You're too valuable. But now the buyers are getting nervous. They think you know too much about the ledgers you've been organizing. He reached out, his fingers digging into her arms with a bruising force. Did you find the black ledger, Sloane? The one with the offshore codes? Tell me you found it. Sloane looked into his eyes and, for the first time, saw the hollow vacuum of his soul. He wasn't looking at his wife. He was looking at a key. That's all you care about? The papers. It's our ticket out, he snapped, his voice rising dangerously. If I don't deliver that ledger tonight, they'll kill me. And if you stay here, Dante will eventually realize you're more trouble than you're worth. He pulled a small, silver object from his pocket. In the moonlight, Sloane realized it wasn't a tool for escape. It was a syringe. Julian, what is that? She whispered, her blood turning to ice. They can't have you talking to him, Sloane, he said, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly flat monotone. If I bring them the ledger and tell them you succumb to the stress, that the pressure of the kidnapping was too much, then we're both safe. You'll just go to sleep. It's better this way. I can't have you telling Dante about my contact in his inner circle. The realization hit her like a physical blow. He wasn't there to rescue her. He was there to tie up the only loose end that could lead Dante back to his buyers. He was going to murder her in the home of the man who had actually been protecting her. You're the ghost, she breathed, looking at the man she had once loved. You're already dead to me. As Julian lunged, Sloane didn't scream for help. She channeled every ounce of the cold, calculated precision she had learned in the archives. She drove her silk-clad knee into his midsection and twisted away, her heavy sapphire necklace swinging like a flail. Dante, she finally cried out, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Julian scrambled toward her, the needle glinting, but he never reached her. A heavy, gloved hand caught him by the throat from behind, lifting him clean off the floor. Dante had appeared like a vengeful specter, his face a mask of pure, murderous rage. He slammed Julian against the stone wall, the syringe clattering harmlessly to the floor. Dante didn't look at Julian. His eyes were fixed on Sloane, searching her face for any sign of a scratch. I told you, Dante growled, his voice vibrating with a lethal promise. The ghosts in this house belong to me. The adrenaline from the confrontation with Julian hadn't yet faded when the air in the corridor shifted again. Dante still held Julian by the throat, but his eyes weren't on the man he was choking. They were fixed on the shadow at the far end of the hallway. A red laser danced across the stone wall, searching for a target, and in an instant, the world moved into a blurred, high-stakes focus. Dante didn't hesitate. He hurled Julian's limp body aside like a piece of discarded trash and lunged for Sloane. He tackled her to the floor just as a silenced gunshot whistled through the air, the bullet shattering a Renaissance vase exactly where her head had been a second before. Down, Dante commanded, his voice a low, vibrating growl. He shielded her body with his own, his heavy wool coat acting as a barrier between her and the glass shards raining down. From the shadows, a second assassin emerged, but Dante's hand was already moving. He pulled a sleek, matte black pistol from his shoulder holster and fired twice with a precision that was chillingly surgical. The hallway fell back into a heavy, ringing silence, broken only by the sound of Julian's frantic, sobbing breaths as he tried to crawl away. Dante stood up slowly, reaching down to pull Sloane to her feet. He didn't check on the men he had just neutralized. He only looked at her. He took her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the line of her jaw with a possessiveness that felt like a claim. His eyes were no longer the cold blue of a winter sea. They were burning with a dark, territorial fire. Look at me, he commanded. Sloane looked. She saw the blood on his cuff, the lethal calm in his expression, and the way his hands were shaking, not with fear, but with the sheer force of the restraint he was using not to hunt down every person who had ever looked at her. "Julian," Sloane gasped, turning toward the shadows where her husband was still cowering. "Forget him," Dante said, his voice dropping to a register that brooked no argument. He stepped between her and Julian, effectively erasing the man from her sight. "He didn't come back for you. He came back to destroy the evidence of his own failure. He treats you like a line item on a ledger, a commodity to be traded when the interest rates get too high." Dante leaned down, his forehead resting against hers for a fleeting, intense second. The scent of gunpowder and cedar enveloped her. "Listen to me very carefully, Sloane. As of this moment, the debt is settled. I don't care about the 40 million. I don't care about the stolen manifests." "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying you're not his debt anymore," Dante declared, his voice echoing through the vaulted hall with the weight of an ancient law. "You are no longer collateral. You are under the protection of the Moretti name. You are mine, not because of a contract and not because of a gamble, because I have decided that the world is not allowed to touch you." He turned his gaze toward Julian, who was being hauled up by two of Dante's guards who had appeared from the shadows. "Take him to the cellar," Dante ordered, his voice flat and final. "He is nothing to us now." As the guards dragged a screaming Julian away, Dante turned back to Sloane. He reached out and unclipped the heavy sapphire collar from her neck, letting the jewels fall into his palm. He didn't put them back on her. Instead, he took her hand, the one still wearing the gold band Julian had given her, and slowly slid the ring off her finger. He dropped the gold onto the marble floor, where it rolled away into the darkness, forgotten. "You're starting over, Sloane," he said, his touch surprisingly warm against her skin. "And this time, you're not walking into the wrong room. You're exactly where you belong." He led her back toward the suite, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. The velvet prison was gone, replaced by something far more complex and dangerous. Sloane didn't look back at the ring or the man who had sold her. She walked beside the Iron King, realizing that for the first time in her life, she wasn't being hidden, she was being heralded. The aftermath of the attack left the villa in a state of silent, vibrating tension. While Dante's enforcers scrubbed the corridors and reinforced the perimeter, Sloane retreated once more to the subterranean archives. She didn't go there to hide. She went there to finish the war. The Ledger of Blood, as Dante's father had called it, sat on her desk, a thick, iron-bound volume that supposedly detailed every betrayal the Moretti family had suffered for a century. Sloane worked through the night, her eyes stinging as she cross-referenced the names in the ledger with the personal phone logs Dante had recovered from Julian's device. Her archivist's brain, sharpened by years of spotting inconsistencies in ancient tax records, began to notice a pattern. It wasn't just Julian's amateur greed. Every time Julian had accessed a file, a secondary digital signature had followed him, a silent shadow that had cleared the way and disabled the internal alarms. She found it at 4 a.m. A series of payments disguised as archival maintenance, flowing to an offshore account linked to the Moretti family's most trusted advisor, Lorenzo. The man who had stood by Dante's father for 30 years was the one feeding Julian the crumbs that had led to her honeymoon trap. Sloane didn't wait. She gathered the files and marched upstairs to Dante's study. The door was open, and he was standing by the window, the dawn light silhouetting his broad shoulders. He looked exhausted, his jaw tight with the weight of the empire he was holding together. "You found it," he said without turning around. He didn't ask. He knew the sound of her determined stride. "Lorenzo," Sloane said, dropping the ledger onto his desk with a heavy thud. He wasn't just helping Julian. He was setting Julian up to take the fall for a much larger theft. He's been draining the Adriatic accounts for years, and he used your unorganizable files as a smokescreen. Dante turned, his eyes scanning the data she had highlighted. As he read, the coldness in his expression shifted from anger to a chilling, calculated resolve. He looked at the paperwork, then up at Sloane. He realized then that she hadn't just saved his money. She had saved his life from a blade he never saw coming. "What do you want, Sloane?" he asked, his voice low. "You've settled the debt. You've exposed the mole. You could ask for a plane ticket, a new identity, €1,000,000. You're free." Sloane walked toward him, stopping until she was within the orbit of his heat. She looked him in the eye, her fear replaced by a new, terrifying clarity. "I don't want to be free to go back to being invisible, Dante. I don't want to be the girl who hides in libraries while men like Julian trade her away." She reached out, her hand hovering over the ledger. "I want a new contract. One written on my terms." Dante's eyebrows rose, a dark spark of amusement dancing in his eyes. "A contract? I stay," Sloane said, her voice steady. "I manage the Moretti archives, all of them. Every secret, every ledger, every piece of history. I become the mind of this family while you are the hand. I'm not a guest, and I'm certainly not an asset. I'm an equal." Dante moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. His touch was no longer the clinical assessment of a captor. It was a slow, burning recognition. "An equal," he whispered. "You're asking to be the consigliere of the Iron King. I'm telling you that you can't afford to lose me," she countered. A slow, dangerous smile spread across Dante's face. He leaned down, his lips brushing against hers in a promise that tasted of salt and power. "I never intended to let you go, Sloane. But if you want a contract, we'll write one in blood and gold. You won't just be the mind of this family. You'll be the heart." In that moment, the archivist who had always played by the rules signed them away forever. She wasn't just surviving the Mafia, she was beginning to lead it. The heavy, iron-wrought doors of the Palazzo Moretti swung open with a familiar, melodic creak, letting in the sharp, salty breeze of a Venetian winter. Exactly 1 year had passed since Sloane Ashford had walked into the wrong room and watched her world disintegrate into shadows and gold. Today, she didn't wear a borrowed robe or a look of panicked confusion. She wore a tailored suit of charcoal silk, a string of black pearls that rested against her throat like a promise, and an expression of absolute, terrifying clarity. As the head of the Moretti Foundation, Sloane had spent the last 12 months doing more than just cataloging the past. She had sanitized the empire's history, turning blood-soaked ledgers into legitimate legacies and untraceable assets into a fortress of legal stability. She was no longer the girl who hid in the dust. She was the one who decided which secrets were worth keeping. The grand foyer was empty, save for the man standing by the towering arched windows. Dante Moretti looked much as he had that first night. Sharp, commanding, and carved from the very stone of the city he ruled. He turned as she approached, his eyes softening in a way that he only ever allowed for her. "The gala is starting in an hour, Sloane," he said, his voice a low rumble that still had the power to make her skin hum. "The guests are expecting the woman who rebuilt the Moretti name." "They can wait," Sloane replied, her voice steady and resonant. She walked toward the grand exit, but she didn't pass through it. Instead, she stopped directly in the center of the doorway, her silhouette framed by the twilight of the Grand Canal. She turned back to face him, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "A year ago, you blocked this door and told me I wasn't leaving. You told me Julian was gone and you were staying." Dante walked toward her, his footsteps echoing against the marble. He stopped just inches away, the heat of his presence as familiar to her now as her own heartbeat. "I remember. You were trembling so hard I thought you might shatter if I breathed on you. I was a different woman then, she whispered. She reached out, her fingers grazing the lapel of his coat before sliding down to rest over his heart. I was waiting for someone to save me, not realizing that I was the only one who could navigate the labyrinth. She stepped back, her hand landing on the heavy brass handle of the door. With a slow, deliberate movement, she pushed it shut, the latch engaging with a sound of absolute finality. She leaned her back against the wood, her eyes locking onto his. "This time," Sloane said, mirroring the words that had once been her sentence but were now her choice, "he's gone. And I'm staying." Dante's gaze darkened with a fierce, prideful heat. He understood the gravity of the vow. It wasn't just a declaration of loyalty to the family. It was a declaration of ownership over her own life. She wasn't his prisoner, and she wasn't just his partner. She was the architect of their future. "You've come a long way from the wrong room, Sloane," he murmured, leaning down until their foreheads touched. "I didn't enter the wrong room, Dante," she countered, her voice dropping to a sultry, confident tone. "I just took a long time to realize that this was the only one I ever belonged in." He reached out, his hand covering hers on the door handle, his fingers interlocked with hers. Outside, the bells of St. Mark's began to toll, signaling the start of a new year and a new era for the Moretti name. But inside the palazzo, the world was silent, reduced to the two of them standing in the threshold of a kingdom they had built together. Sloane Ashford had started her honeymoon as a commodity, but she was ending it as a queen. And this time, she was the one who held the key. If you fell in love with this story, kindly like and subscribe to the channel. It means the world to me. Thanks for watching till this moment.